Hello, Criterion. I was just calling up to ask when you will put Silence of the Hams in as one of the titles for the Criterion Collection. Hello? It's a rare film. You think they'd want to include it? I don't know. The past two Halloween times we've gone through and looked at different Criterion titles, horror and sci-fi and adjacent genres. I've just taken a look at them, done some mini reviews for you, picked out a few of my favorites, and I thought, hey, this year, let's do that again. This time I shortened it from 10 to 9, changed it up a little bit. But I made sure to go through and choose some classics, and you can check out those videos from previous years if you haven't seen them yet. But I thought, hey, now's the time of year to look at horror, and what better way to look at horror than through the lens of the Criterion Collection. Let's take a look. Spine number 30. I'm not a good whistler, so I'm going to do it this way. M. From 1931. Peter Lorre's big break. We've talked about Peter Lorre before on this channel, of course. His big American breakthrough in 1935 was Mad Love. I've gone over that film. And his big English-speaking breakthrough was actually a British film. Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much. But M was the movie that made Peter Lorre a European star almost overnight. Oops, Mad Love fell in. As he plays Hans Beckert, a child predator who strangles little girls and for some reason feels this compulsion that he simply can't stop doing it. It's a very modern movie, I think, and indeed the modern sort of manhunt crime genre can trace itself back to M pretty effectively. The police, using all the latest technology at the time, trying to figure out who this mysterious killer is, why he does what he does, think of ways they can protect, especially the children of the city, while the underworld, realizing that the increased police dragnet and police presence everywhere has greatly impacted their ability to function, sets out their own sort of network of spies and agents to track this man down and kill him once and for all. M is very effective. It's a little on the long side. It could probably be about 20 minutes shorter. And it's very procedural. They definitely want you to make sure that the viewer understands exactly what's going on. But Fritz Lang does a great job as director. A lot of weird angles, the camera put in bizarre places. There are several shots filmed from above. There are several scenes that are completely silent, even though M, of course, is a sound film. And he does a lot of intercutting between the police procedure and sort of the criminal procedures as well. But Peter Lorre steals every scene he's in. Indeed, the big finale, when the criminals finally have him surrounded and are just waiting for an excuse to hang him or cut his throat, he announces, ich muss, I must. And he feels this compulsion to kill children. He can't understand why, and he can't control it. And he feels very bad after he kills them, but he can't, stop himself before he goes to actually do it. Very effective stuff. I mean, there's a reason this was the movie that made him a star. This is an older Criterion DVD, bought this secondhand years ago. It's gotten new artwork and a little bit more of a fashionable release since. This red and black pattern's kind of bizarre, I always thought. I like the newer cover much better, but this is the one I've got. They might have done some additional retranslating of the subtitles, make it a little more accurate. But if you're interested in crime thrillers, especially very procedural ones, M would be, I think, the way to go. Even modern viewers can get quite a bit out of it. A very underrated director is Michael Powell, best remembered today for his work with Emery Pressburger as the Archers, made several classic 1940s British films. And so, looking at one of his solo works here, Spine number 58, 1960, Peeping Tom, a young man with an obsession with cameras and filming things, goes to record the dying expressions of women, usually prostitutes, as he kills them, and indeed the ensuing manhunt, and the young woman who happens to be involved with him at the time, realizing her own life might be in danger. Peeping Tom killed Michael Powell's career. The British press, the British populace, did not have any patience for it at the time. And indeed, Michael Powell was the kind of filmmaker, I think, who always kind of wanted to court controversy. One of his other solo films, The Age of Consent, is included here on the Michael Powell set. That one also probably raised some eyebrows, with a very young Helen Mirren in it. But Peeping Tom is very effective. It's filmed in color, it's beautifully shot. We have a protagonist, interestingly, Michael Powell plays his father in flashbacks too, who has recorded ever since he was born, particularly his responses to trauma, being injured, being scared, that sort of thing, and how this shaped him into this bizarre sort of psychotic individual whose fascination with cameras has kind of opened up windows into his mind that people would rather stay closed. It's a very bleak film, and like M, is surprisingly modern. Today we live in a world where everything we say and do is recorded and uploaded and reposted and shared and monitored and everything else. Peeping Tom kind of predicted that way back in 1960. We have children who've been on camera since they were born. That sort of thing, just as our main character is here. Very effective. Not the easiest film to watch, but I do highly recommend it. And the works of Michael Powell in general, I highly recommend. This is one of my favorites, A Matter of Life and Death, with David Niven. Also a great film, and a Criterion title, I might add. Jumping ahead a little bit, from 1978, Spy Number 142, Richard Chamberlain, The Last Wave. Going to Australia now for a change. Richard Chamberlain as a lawyer who starts seeing these weird visions of Sydney, Australia being flooded or destroyed by giant waves, and this bizarre weather phenomena going on where their house floods and huge storms blow up out of nowhere, and everybody's confused how all this meteorological stuff could be going on. Of course, it's tied in with the very angry group of Aboriginals who have been mistreated and believe that a cycle is due to be completed, and that cycle might be the end of Sydney and perhaps even all civilization in Australia. The Last Wave, I remember reading a review of it, I think it was Danny Peary's review, that said, this is a movie that gives you more questions as it goes instead of giving you answers. And that's very true. In The Last Wave, we don't always know exactly what's real, what's a premonition or a vision, and what's a dream. And the movie is a combination of all of those. We never really get a clear answer as to why things are happening, but, as that review also pointed out, that kind of makes the film stronger. It's very strange and dreamlike and ethereal, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but the strength of the cast, some brilliant effects shots, the big finale actually uses some stock footage from presumably a nature film or something like that, but it works really, really well, and it's such a creepy movie. I really like The Last Wave. I was pretty impressed. Richard Chamberlain, I remember him mostly for The Towering Inferno, but he got cast in a lot of ridiculous things, so it's nice to see him here playing a very intelligent part, you know, a very pragmatic man who wonders, what's with all these visions and things like that? We've talked about, of course, movies like The Clairvoyant and Night Has a Thousand Eyes on this channel, so kind of good to see something similar updated for a new decade. We've talked French horror in the past. Of course, Diabolique, the movie that makes people afraid of boarding schools and bathtubs. That one's always a lot of fun. Last year we talked about Beauty and the Beast, which is a beautiful movie. That fell down too. A beautiful movie if you can put up with Jean Marais' constant "Belle, excusez-moi, belle." He spends most of the movie whining, even though he's half man, half lion or whatever. But let's look at a different type of French film here. This one being kind of horror, but also kind of sci-fi as well. Eyes Without a Face. A scientist's daughter was horribly disfigured in a car accident. The scientist was the man driving at the time. He feels very guilty. He's ruined his daughter's life. She has to wear this blank mask to hide these horrible, disfiguring injuries. His resolve is to kill young women with the help of one of his former patients, played by Alida Valli, who we remember from The Third Man, of course, and find a new face for his daughter and graft it on. This pops up in a lot of those reviews of like the grossest horror movies made before 1970, that sort of thing. The imagery of him drawing on a presumably unconscious woman's face, getting ready to slice it off all in one go, is iconic. You can find that on several YouTube thumbnails and so on. It is very graphic, very surgical. I think that's kind of why it's so scary, is the doctor is just looking at this as another surgical routine. Pretty creepy stuff. But Eyes Without a Face does work really well. Naturally, it's also something of a police manhunt movie. These young women who turn up dead or who've disappeared. What's the story with that? It's a weirdly sympathetic movie. We only get to see the scientist's daughter without her mask once. It's a very effective visual, even though it's kind of deliberately blurred and stuff like that. And we also get to see how her body reacts to having a new face grafted on, and how it might take more than one death to truly give those eyes a new face. A little on the gruesome side, but overall, you can have a pretty good time with it if you like something a little more gross. one we have talked about before. The Phantom Carriage, spine number 579. Interesting stuff. We talked about this in my New Year's video. The last person to die in 1 year has to drive the death carriage all the next year, picking up the souls of those who have been recently deceased. The Phantom Carriage is very much a morality story. There's a happy ending, you know, the man who is, sort of, shall we say, flirting with death soon realizes that no, he was all wrong, he should give up his life of sin and drunkenness and be more productive. It's often compared to A Christmas Carol, and that's a very fair comparison, but the Phantom Carriage has some beautiful visuals, almost otherworldly visuals too. The carriage, as we see on the front, that collects the souls of the dead, goes underwater at one point for a very effective scene. A lot of interesting stuff. Yeah, it's kind of a folksy fairy story, but at the same time, got some great visuals and a really foreboding dark atmosphere. Of course, it was directed by the great Victor Seastrom, who also gave us the very underrated The Wind. We'll be talking more about Victor Seastrom when we get to Lon Chaney next week. But the Phantom Carriage, you know, despite its kind of, you know, mawkish ending, is definitely worth your time. You can check out my New Year's movies video, find a little bit more about that. Let's go into science fiction now, a little bit. Talk about Things to Come. Things to Come is probably the most famous direct sci-fi movie of the 1930s. You know, we've talked about things like The Invisible Man and The Island of Lost Souls. Those kind of mix horror and sci-fi, but Things to Come is almost pretty much straight science fiction. Things to Come, telling the story of how in 1940 a huge apocalyptic war will begin that will destroy England and most of the rest of the world. But don't worry, from the ashes of that civilization will rise a greater one. Things to Come is a little bit too broad in scope for its own good. I think it would have been a little more effective if they'd kind of trimmed it down and focused it. The best scenes feature Ralph Richardson as the boss. After this huge war that begins in 1940 and doesn't end until well into the 1960s, with basically the entire world being destroyed, he emerges as the leader of what used to be presumably London or a suburb of London, and in his efforts to control something called the wandering sickness, giving us a little bit of that horror movie vibe here, where people get this disease that causes them just to wander aimlessly, be completely catatonic till they eventually die of exhaustion. Ralph Richardson's boss just has them all shot on sight to prevent spreading of the germ, and thus becomes king. So it's up to Cabal, played by Raymond Massey there on the cover, who helps to find this new sort of peace organization that swings down to end this pre-Road Warrior post-apocalyptic civilization and bring the world all together. But even then, once the world's become a utopian paradise, no one's ever truly happy. Indeed, Sir Cedric Hardwicke's evil sculptor man is adamant that the world needs to not be a utopia. So that summary probably didn't make a ton of sense, because again, Things to Come is trying to do a lot of stuff in the space of less than an hour and 40 minutes. So it's, again, kind of all over the place. For many years we had junky VHS copies. This one's in pretty bad shape, but this is the one I had growing up. It's a really cool movie, and it did help, I think, to shape science fiction quite a bit, and indeed the somewhat eerie predictions of World War II and subsequent conflicts are kind of in there as well. But Things to Come could have maybe benefited by shortening down its scope a little bit. I don't know. I like Raymond Massey, but this isn't a favorite performance of his, for me anyway. I like him better like Arsenic and Old Lace and stuff like that. Cedric Hardwicke goes absolutely crazy and chews the scenery. Again, those Ralph Richardson scenes of post-apocalyptic London are, I think, some of the best in the film. But still worth watching. I do recommend it. 3 more to go. Spine number 777, The Brood. You know, we've talked about The Fly on this channel, both of these directed by the great David Cronenberg. And David Cronenberg made The Brood because he was in the middle of a divorce and found it as a way, I guess, to let out some of his anger and frustration over all of that. Now, The Brood is not as gross as The Fly. Again, we've talked about The Fly on here before. Some people will not watch The Fly because it is so incredibly gross. I get it. I think it's amazing, but you wouldn't want to eat while you watched it. The Brood does have some of that grossness in it, as it involves Oliver Reed's clinic, where he practices psychoplasmics, where you can manifest your anger or your rage or your suffering physically, and he has patients, for example, who imagine themselves covered with bruises and scars from being abused as a child, that sort of thing. And his star patient is Nola, played by Samantha Eggar, who's very angry over her divorce. She's frustrated with her husband and her parents and her child, and the fallout from that is her ability to produce the brood, creatures who exist as pure rage. They seek to kill or destroy the things that she dislikes. And indeed, Oliver Reed has to figure out how to control them, and Samantha Eggar, Nola in this case, her family, has to figure out how they're going to deal with these creatures. It reminds me a lot of Don't Look Now, which we talked about in a previous video on Criterion Horror, because Don't Look Now deals with this kind of small, red-clad creature that no one's exactly sure what it is or what it's doing, and The Brood definitely borrows from that with these little tiny killer sort of dwarves, and exactly how they're connected. And indeed, it's the birth of the brood is the big gross-out scene that everybody remembers. But if you can look past some of the disgusting, gross visuals and Samantha Eggar's very creepy performance, you could definitely have a good time with the brood. Oliver Reed, of course, is amazing in anything, and there's a good air of kind of mystery building up to how they're going to figure out what the brood is and how they're going to destroy them. I do recommend it. Again, though, similar to The Fly, probably shouldn't eat while you watch it. And speaking of gross-out moments, another director known for his gory visuals, Guillermo del Toro. Pan's Labyrinth, spine number 838. Of course, he also gave us The Shape of Water, which I believe does have a Criterion release, but I don't own that one. Pan's Labyrinth is set during the Spanish Civil War. There aren't really a lot of movies, at least not for American audiences, that deal with the Spanish Civil War, probably because it's not something that's widely discussed in the US, as Americans fought on both sides of it, so it kind of isn't one that comes up a whole lot due to the controversy it could potentially create. But Pan's Labyrinth is presented as sort of a fairy tale allegory for the Spanish Civil War, as the stepdaughter of a fascist commander is sent to live in this sort of isolated military base in the middle of the forest. And of course there are loyalist agents all around who are planning a massive offensive, and the stress and the tension that gets to her stepfather, gets to her ill mother and other characters, and how it's also parallel with this fairy world that she's invented for herself. We all know, of course, the famous sort of skinwalker creature with the eyeballs he puts in his palms and looks at her and that sort of thing. We recognize that. Doug Jones of Hellboy pops up as a satyr, he's called Fawn in this case, but a half-goat, half-man creature who kind of guides her, insisting she's this lost fairy princess and so on. Really interesting stuff. Beautiful, beautiful visuals. I would argue even more beautiful than The Shape of Water. Is it for everybody? Probably not, but I think Pan's Labyrinth did a good job of portraying both kind of the human side of this conflict. We see, of course, loyalist sympathizers being executed. We see the stress and the tension this takes on everybody, and most of the cast ends up dead by the finale. It definitely has that kind of wartime feel to it, and I do really like that. But the fairy stuff, the kind of fantasy stuff, very interesting. A giant frog that pukes everywhere, several different mystical creatures, little Tinkerbell-like fairies. Really fun and very distinct movie. I had a good time with it. Glad I got this one at the last Criterion sale. And last, but not least, they're coming to get you, Barbara. Stop it! Night of the Living Dead. So Night of the Living Dead, at first I thought would be like watching Carnival of Souls on Criterion. Night of the Living Dead was made on a shoestring budget, so was Carnival of Souls. Carnival of Souls was so fun to watch in Blu-ray, but it made it look so cheap. Like, you could tell this was just a cheapo budget B-movie kind of thing. And I thought, oh crap, Night of the Living Dead's gonna look the same way. This will be like, oh man, this thing looks like junk. But actually, I think it holds up even with a very fancy restoration. Night of the Living Dead is a classic. There's no two ways about it. I actually did something different this Halloween, and I watched the work print edit, Night of Anubis, missing a few scenes, has some alternate takes, has some different footage, but I was pretty impressed overall with it. Night of the Living Dead, yeah, the acting's no great shakes, and some of the effects don't hold up too well. Others do, though. The discovery of the corpse in the farmhouse still looks amazing. But for me, George Romero's Dead movies, Dawn of the Dead will always be my favorite, one of the few movies that my brother and I could agree on as kids, so we watched it religiously. I've been to Monroeville Mall where it was filmed a few times. Granted, it looks nothing now like it did back then, but still interesting stuff. So it's always good to see where all those George Romero zombie movies actually began. And Night of the Living Dead, yeah, it's a cheapo kind of flick, but I think it holds up quite well. Has a very bleak, downer ending, which might turn some people off. And a lot of it's more about how, in a tense situation, people will fight with each other more than they will fight their actual enemies in this case. So, interesting stuff there. And there are other horror movies like The Killer Shrews that kind of experiment with that. But at the end of the day, I was really happy to have Night of the Living Dead on Criterion. It didn't look quite as cheap and chintzy as I thought, and I could enjoy it all over again. And those are our 9 Criterion titles for today. Please comment below with some of your favorite Criterion titles or some that you are watching this Halloween. Hope to see you next week for Lon Chaney. So long, everybody. Watch out for ghouls.